Wow, thank you for coming. What a great turnout here. This is actually truly amazing. In my role for FireEye, I help advise governments on cybersecurity matters. And today I'm here to talk on behalf of Mandiant. Mandiant will actually be in Korea in March. So any follow-on meetings you'd like, please get with our local FireEye team to help set those up. So today I'm here to talk about why FireEye bought Mandiant and the value proposition it brings to our customers. Quickly, I'm going to go over Mandiant as a company, why Mandiant, and why FireEye and Mandiant, and how to redefine your win strategy. Just so you know, Mandiant initially started as an incident response company, a services company. And like Steve said, their tool set was so good that customers were requesting them. So they productized their tool set, and we ended up procuring that and integrating that into our solution set. But Mandiant was based on the foundation that there is no perfect security, there is no total solution. It's an ongoing, agile, and constantly changing threat landscape that you have to be able to adapt and mitigate to. Mandiant is found throughout over almost half of the top Fortune 500 companies across every industry verticals that there is. This is Kevin Mandia, the actual founder of Mandiant. He is now FireEye's COO. As you can see here, he's listed as one of the most influential and leading thinkers, global thinkers, of how to address security. For those who haven't seen it, this report right here is what we call the APT-1 report by Mandiant. Kevin Mandia is shown here actually testifying in front of Congress to give them specific hard evidence of China's espionage activities against U.S. Now, people have seen this type of photographs and graphics a lot about how APTs and today's targeted attacks bypass traditional defenses. But I want to spend real quickly these four figures that Kevin Mandia produced from his investigations last year. What this is showing is that out of all the victims that they investigated in 2013, 100% had up-to-date antivirus signatures, 100%. And 100% of the breaches involved stolen credentials. Secondly, only 54% of the actual compromised systems had malware inside of them. So really think about that. A lot of people think the problem with cyber is malware. But I can tell you malware is just a tool to open the door. And then it's used to move laterally and to open more doors. But the majority of the operations is done by a human being behind the keyboard. And that human being is very adaptable. He's watching for when he gets detected so he can quickly change his techniques. Now this figure right here, 63%, that really applies to the US. And this is basically a number of how many external entities, specifically law enforcement, like the FBI, actually informed companies that they were compromised. If you remember that video earlier, it showed that CISO sitting at his desk and he got a phone call from the FBI. That happens all the time in the United States. So this is an alarming figure that the majority of the compromises are being informed by outside entities. On average, from Mandiant's investigation, they're seeing that the threat goes undetected 243 days, which is about 8 months. 8 months of undetection. In 8 months, I can get everything I want from a company or a government. And then about 2 months for remediation. And if you look at here, this initial breach to remediation is almost a year. A year to a company, a year to a government, and you can lose everything and be out of business. So why did FireEye buy Mandiant? This is so true that together as a company, 1 + 1 truly equals 3. And that third factor, and the one word that I use when people ask me why we bought Mandiant, is to improve our intelligence. Intelligence is key. Intelligence will help you improve your detection. Intelligence will help you take threat data and put it into context so it relates to your organization. Intelligence and sharing of intelligence will help teach you, will help you learn to understand what is important, what you should be focusing your efforts on. With the acquisition of Mandiant, we gained additional commodity, curated, and community intelligence. So what does that mean? Commodity is just that. It's the malware that FireEye and Mandiant is collecting every day, over 2 million binaries and samples that we analyze every day. Curated, this is the very specific intelligence that Mandiant maintains on their threat actor profiles. So they're tracking over 200 hacking groups around the world and constantly updating them of their profiles. And the community intelligence is just that. It's whatever information is shared through some of the sharing platforms, information sharing platforms that Mandiant and FireEye will be promoting. So essentially, this is the graph that shows why we bought Mandiant. At the top, as you can see, I don't want to talk about every point here, but the main thing I want you to focus on is that first bullet point. 4 million sensors now that FireEye and Mandiant has combined. In the world of government, intelligence is based on your sensors. The more sensors you have, the better the efficacy of your intelligence, the better the detail of your intelligence. So whenever you buy a FireEye solution or a Mandiant service, you have now access to over 4 million sensors deployed around the world. And these sensors, like Steve talked about, are not based on signatures. They're based on our patented virtual technology that is looking for 0 days. It's based on Mandiant's IOCs, which is indicators of compromise. And I'll talk about IOCs a little bit later. But IOCs are not signatures. A lot of people get that confused, but I'll show you an example later. Nucleus and helix. This is Mandiant's core brain of everything that they know. And combining that with FireEye's DTI database, or Dynamic Threat Intelligence, we now have the world's best database for indicators of compromise, threat actor dossiers and profiles, and their associated TTPs, techniques, tactics, and procedures. And if you look down here, we are tracking over 200 attack groups all throughout the world, not just China, Russia, everywhere, even the US. We have a library of over 150,000 indicators that are constantly growing, constantly changing. And these indicators is the actionable information that you use to implement into your security network. And lastly, I'm going to just touch on the APT1 report that I mentioned earlier. But this report was done almost a year ago, and it's still one of the hottest, most read reports out there in the industry. We could have charged a lot of money for this report because it's probably the single best report I've ever seen of a threat actor. I'm from Department of Defense, and I can tell you, I haven't seen anything this good even from NSA. With FireEye and Mandiant, we have now completed our continuous threat protection platform. FireEye started off as a networking company. We're very good at monitoring and blocking command and control channels and detecting data exfiltration. But we needed Mandiant to be able to scan at the endpoint. The key thing about the endpoint here is memory analysis. There's not a lot of solutions in the market that does this very well. But in-memory analysis is extremely important. And moving forward, we see more and more trends of malware being in the memory and not on the disk. What does that mean, not being in the memory and not on disk? It means essentially they're invisible. If they're inside the memory and there's nothing being written to the disk, the majority of the security solutions out there won't detect it. I talked about threat intelligence, combining our two companies' threat intelligence and combining the dedicated experts from both companies. We now have a world-class team of first responders, of security consultants, that do everything from managing security services to even all phases of triage to full recovery. This is a project that I'm working on with Mandiant called Project FireEye, where we're working on the next generation SOC architecture, Security Operations Center. So essentially, with FireEye and Mandiant creating a platform to continuously protect our customers, we are now able to hunt for the APT not only at the network but at the endpoint level. We can integrate both the network and the endpoint seamlessly and integrate with our partner ecosystem as well. Because we can generate IOCs automatically at the network level, we can accelerate the triage phase so that we can immediately validate, and if it confirms to be malicious, we can contain. And as Steve showed in his demo, when we contain, we keep the malware from spreading. We keep the hacker from spreading, going laterally. But we still have access into that endpoint so we can still conduct our investigation. And that's what I mean by doing analysis without forensics. A lot of forensics in the past, you had to physically take the computer offline, physically take the hard drive out. But with Mandiant and FireEye technology, that is completely automated now. There's a new security paradigm that FireEye and Mandiant is forging. It's no longer about continuous monitoring. Monitoring does you nothing. It has to be about continuous protection. And it should not be about incident response. Incident response, even though Mandiant makes the majority of its money that way, is very expensive for the customers. It needs to be about continuous response. And I'm going to give you examples of this later. Collective intelligence. Now more than ever, we need to be sharing intelligence. In the past, governments don't share intelligence. Companies don't share intelligence because they're afraid of national secrets or losing some type of competitive edge. If you don't share intelligence, you will be the target and be retargeted and continually targeted until there's nothing left of your organization. Collective response. We, as defenders, cannot scale to the attackers. The attackers have too many automated tools. They have too many easy-to-use tools that require almost no learning curve to be able to implement and use against the defenders. So without a collective response, we will lose this cat and mouse game. Ultimately, this needs to lead to what's called a community defense. With community defense, FireEye and Mandiant is pioneering a new way of looking at security. Social media does very well at connecting people and sharing information. So why don't we do the same thing with security? Why don't we manage our users, manage certain communities of interest so we can create secure private portals? Then why don't we share indicators, share those IOCs with those people that we've trusted? And then choose how we want to learn. When you start learning, when you start doing research collaboration with other analysts and other forensic people, you really start to learn what matters to you, what specifically is found in your environment and not so much across the world. This is what's called the Mandiant Intelligence Center. This is the heart and soul of everything that Mandiant knows. And this is the most desired product that is requested of Mandiant. In the coming year, we will be integrating FireEye's DTI intelligence into the Mandiant Intelligence Center. But as of right now, it's a subscription-based portal access, secure portal access, that gives you everything that we know about threat actors, all the different 200 groups that we're tracking, all the different campaigns that each one of those groups are a part of, all their behavior, their methodologies, their TTPs, and IOCs for you to implement into your network immediately. You can even securely analyze domains or IPs without fear of being infected. We're that proxy for you. You can download any binaries from these malicious sites to do your own offline analysis. And we're constantly updating some of the more hottest trends of indicators that we're seeing. This is what's called Project Mansfield. This is our attempt to be Facebook-like of information sharing. Just like social media, you can create user groups, you can give them permissions, you can give them read-write abilities, you can give them sharing abilities, whether they can share it outside the group or only within the group. And you have this portal for all your trusted users and your community of interest to then come to and see the indicators that's compromising maybe one group that they can share with the rest of the community. This is the concept of community defense that we're going to have to take, because security itself is a very expensive proposition. But we can utilize more smartly how to collaborate and work together. So what is this indicators of compromise that I've been talking about? Mandiant has pioneered what's called Open IOC. It's an open standard format that basically describes malicious activity. At the top here, you'll see where it says MD5 checksum. That's essentially only what signatures do. Signature is just a snapshot of something. But if you look at this IOC, there's a lot more. It shows file name types. It shows behavior. It shows characteristics and the methodologies of these attackers. So this is a much more detailed description of the malicious activity or the malicious hacker that's in your network that you're looking for. Mandiant has free tools, free editors for you to be able to create this, and you can export this in XML or any other format that you need to be able to consume into your current security architecture. With IOCs, not only can you describe the methodology to improve detection, but now you can start doing attribution. You can actually now say it's this particular group that's coming from China or this particular group coming from Russia. You can start doing profiling. The law enforcement community does profiles of all their criminals. They profile their activities, where they live, how they work, how they do their business. You can now start doing and building this profile library of IOCs. And with that, you can then start to predict the next area of attack, the next area that they will plan to try to infiltrate later in the future. So now let's move to this report, APT1. Inside this report, we included over 3,000 different IOCs that completely describe one of China's most notorious cyber operations unit, 61398. That's the military designation for that particular group, very secretive group under the People's Liberation of China. In this report, there's hard evidence of exactly what they're taking, and as a surprise to the audience that came here, I'm going to share something with you that you will not find on the internet or even find from reading this report. There's two things that I'm going to share for you that hasn't really been disclosed outside of closed doors. The first thing is there's a 5-minute video. If you log into the website, download the report, there's also a link for a 5-minute video. That 5-minute video is us recording live the actual Chinese hackers doing their job. So a lot of people have asked us, how did you record that live? Did you go to China and deploy your sensors inside of China? I mean, how were you able to record that? And the simple answer is, we actually had our sensors inside of a major U.S. defense contractor, probably one of the biggest defense contractors in the United States. Inside their network, the Chinese had been in there for over 4 years, undetected. And using that U.S. defense contractor's network, they were surfing the web, they were doing everything, so their traffic looks completely legitimate. The second thing is, what did they take? I can't share everything that they can take. I can only share the ones that have been publicly released. But before I show you that, they were able to take 6.5 terabytes in 10 months. 6.5 terabytes is more than what most organizations have in their SANs. And that defense contractor I told you about, 4 years and 10 months that they remained there until we actually went there and told them about it. This is China's new stealth fighter. This is the U.S. older stealth fighter. China's new UAV and one of the U.S.'s UAV. As you can see here, there's striking similarities in the design. And I would venture to bet that even the chemical composition of the coating of the outside is exactly the same as well. Cyber, to most people, doesn't really affect them because they don't feel an immediate pain. In this particular case, it took about 5 to 10 years to productize stolen intellectual property. So it'll take governments about 5 to 10 years later before you see what they actually stole from you today. But that doesn't hold true for the commercial sector. Does anyone know what this phone is? This phone here is called a Goo phone. It's from China. It was just released yesterday. It was just released yesterday, 3 days after Samsung released the Samsung Galaxy S5. This is their new phone, and if you can tell, it's identical in every way except for the word Goo phone instead of Samsung. How did they release an identical phone, even the specs, the specification, the chipset, the Android OS that's on top of it is exactly the same. The only thing that's different is that the Goo phone doesn't have the Samsung TouchWiz interface. But aside from that, it's identical. So in the commercial sector, they can productize intellectual property in months to under 2 years max. So earlier, our vice president talked about protecting the sovereignty of Korea, protecting our way of life, protecting our economy. This will eventually make Samsung and Korea's economy an afterthought. If we don't start now, we won't feel the pain until much, much later. And at that point, it'll be too late. One thing to point out is that all threat actors are not equal. Their skill levels are not equal. As you can see here, this is the worst kind, the nation state. The ones that, in South Korea, the ones that we feel every year from our neighbors to the north. They like to destroy data. They don't like to just take it. They like to destroy our hard drives. All the way down to the nuisance. This is a lot of the DDoS attacks. This is the high volume, very noisy attacks. What I wanted to show you here is that these guys, the hacktivists, the anonymous, the cybercrime, the data theft, they're very, very targeted, very low volume. These guys are very high volume. So for those people in this room that is part of a security team, and if you're using a SIM, you know that you get hundreds and thousands of alerts every day. Well, these guys depend on you getting frustrated, getting tired of chasing down every single one of those alerts. So essentially, they're using all this noise that's being generated by this type of activity to hide their very targeted low and slow movements within your networks. So what can we do about it? Well, there are many differing options. But the key thing I want to point out here is with every option, there's a consequence. And as you can see, some of these options are very severe. Retrieving stolen data, planting fake data, hacking back, indicting foreign hackers, cyber attacks, and reciprocal espionage. All this will only lead to an escalation in conflict. Which brings me to this news article that was so disturbing to me because I read this just not too long ago, 21 February. The South Korean government is developing a Stuxnet-like cyber weapon. This is frightening news. I can tell you as part of DoD cyber operations, there is nothing good that will come from this. I'm not a politician. I'm not here to tell the Korean government what they should or shouldn't do, but there's nothing good that will come from this. The first phase will begin with militarization of social media, using social media to try to brainwash the population to support a military agenda. The second phase will be the actual weaponizing of cyber, creating that Stuxnet-like type malware. And the third phase will be some type of kinetic counter effect. And what I mean by kinetic, I mean a physical retaliation back from our neighbors. So nothing good can come from us announcing that we're developing a cyber weapon. So what can we do about it? The majority of the people are down here, and the majority of the attackers are up here. There is a disparaging gap of defense versus offense. The offense, the attackers have the complete advantage because we don't know as defenders what they're going to do next. So they ultimately have the advantage. To make matters worse, if we look at the human capital, the skill level, I'm going to use Taekwondo as an example here. We got green belt, red belt, and black belt. If you're down here, if your enterprise is down here and you're at a green belt level, how are you going to fight a black belt? It's not possible, and you're going to lose every time, and that's why Korea and the US and every other country continues to have these cyber-type malicious events. All you can do is what we call attack the gap. I don't mean the clothing store. I'm talking about this gap right here between defense and offense. There is no amount of money or technology that you can buy that will close this gap. There's no laws or policies or regulations that will close this gap. The bad guys will always exist in this gray area, and they have the advantage. So what you can do, what I talked about earlier, is that continuous monitoring, the continually responding, being part of a collective intelligence group, being part of a collective response back, and being part of a community defense is the only way that you can leverage those people around you, your like industry, your like governments, to combat this gray area. This is what's known as the attack lifecycle kill chain. Malware is always usually here at the initial compromise, and it's always usually here when things move laterally. But everything else is a manual process usually done by a hacker behind a keyboard. And in order to create a very robust indicator of compromise, you have to be able to find the chain of evidence at each one of these different phases. With that IOC from that evidence, you'll be able to actively hunt in your networks for the adversary. Hash values, IP, domains, that's the easy part. What FireEye and Mandiant focuses on is finding those host and network artifacts, the tools, and the TTPs. Those are what's really difficult, and not many companies can do them very well. Like I said earlier, the challenge is that you're getting thousands of alerts every day, and because you ignore them, there are high-risk events that are going unnoticed, and the attackers are roaming free in your networks. This is essentially the concept of finding a needle in a haystack of needles. Which needle is the most dangerous? This is actually an old slide, but I wanted to put it up here because this is when we were still partnering with Mandiant. And what this slide shows you here is an ecosystem. So here's a security guy. He's like, okay, now what? I'm getting thousands of alarms and things like that. What do I do next? Well, with FireEye, at that time, we just simply quarantined the malware, and then we waited for the Mandiant agent to then take action. But now that we've bought Mandiant, we've completely automated that process. As Steve showed in his video, as soon as we detect something at the network, we'll send an IOC to the host. The host will be contained and remediated in real time, automatically, and we're trying to keep a goal of 10 minutes. That's our goal that we're setting for ourselves, to try to remediate, find, and fix under 10 minutes. So here's a good starting point. Usually after my lectures, people ask me, so where do I start? Well, you need to ask yourself these three things. Actually, two things. First, if you don't know that you're compromised, reach out to us. We can do a very thorough vulnerability assessment of your network. If you just want to know, are you prepared for a compromise, reach out to us. We have very good program assessments, and like I showed you earlier, some of our SOC development. And worst case, if you've already been breached and you know you've been breached, reach out to us for our incident response services. And this is just more listings of some of Mandiant's professional services. So I just want to leave you with this one final thought as you're leaving today. Ask yourself, if you're a CISO or if you're on a security team, are you compromised? Can you say if there's anyone in your network? And then tell yourself, don't become a headline. It's not merely being compromised. It's about becoming a headline. Because as soon as you become a headline, then you become public. And the reputation, the disturbance to your business and revenue is completely affected. In redefining your win strategy, the objective should be to implement a continuous threat platform that reduces your time to detect and time to fix. And you can only do that if you can detect, contain, resolve, and prevent in real time. Not near real time, in real time. And then being part of that community defense that I talked about earlier will help prevent not only your neighbor from being compromised, but ultimately you. Thank you very much.